Hey folks, Rob Flux here again. We had some technical challenges there, so my humble apologies on that. Hopefully, this stream is coming through a second time and all working well. Sanity checking, I've got some sound. If somebody could please, I guess, give me a message, some way, shape, or form to say this is all going live, that would be fantastic. It's open mic night, which is your chance to actually ask me a bucket load of questions. And so, if you want to ask some questions, we ask that you submit those questions early. That gives me a little bit of a chance to prep for the questions so that I guess I can give you the most informed answers as humanly possible. So, if you would like to do that for next month, make sure you click on the links below, submit your question early. That gives me a little bit of time to prep. That said, we've got a bucket load of questions that have come through, and so I'm going to get to those in a sec. But before I do, we have a bucket load of stuff actually happening in our community at the moment, folks, and I want to give you a couple of announcements, which we normally don't do on these Sunday sessions. So please forgive me as we go through a couple of those. So firstly, it is the 10th birthday of Property Developer Network. That's right. I've been silly enough to be running this community for 10 years now. What started out as 5 mates around my kitchen table, I guess, then turned into a public forum in August of 2012. And so this has now migrated into being the largest property networking group in the country. And I'm super proud of the fact that we run these events in 3 different locations. So we are going to celebrate in all 3 of those locations before we start to expand out to the rest of Australia. So if you are elsewhere in Australia and you want us to come to you, make sure that you actually reach out and let us know on our Facebook community. Now, that said, the birthday celebrations are going to start in Brisbane on the 20th of August. We're then going to go to Sydney on the 27th, Melbourne on the 3rd of September. And the panel, so what we're going to do this time around is slightly different to how we run our normal events. We're going to have an industry experts panel in every single state. And whilst we're going to have different experts in each state, we're going to have town planners, civil engineers, architects, accountants, property lawyers sitting at the front of the room answering all your questions. Now, this is the best time for you to actually come and bring your questions and actually ask and see that you may get different answers from different experts for the same question. For example, if you're asking someone about your entity structures, you might get an asset protection type answer from your solicitor. You might get a tax minimization type answer from your accountant, and you might get a completely different answer from the financier to say how you are going to actually go about getting those questions. So if you want to come to these events, make sure you go to our events page, developernetwork.com.au/events, and register for those. These are going to be super popular. Plus, all of the industry experts have said they're going to get there half an hour earlier. So from 1:30 p.m., we want everybody to arrive early. We want to set the party scene. We're going to have and balloons and all sorts of things, plus a whole bunch of giveaways too, folks. So make sure you're actually there. Arrive half an hour earlier because we know that it's going to be a swarm at the front door. So we need you to arrive a little bit earlier, mingle with the experts, get to know everyone, socialize, and then we're going to kick on into the night. The other big announcement that we've got is I am running a whole day event called the Property Development Summit on the 13th of August, which is next weekend. So depending upon when you're watching this session, this event may be over. So please take note of the date, but go to propertydevelopmentsummit.com.au. This is a one-day event that does 2 things in particular. One, it gives my view of the market. So I do these market updates on a very regular basis and give you, the community, my interpretation of how I'm actually reading the market fundamentals. That is the drivers that are pushing our market in certain directions. And I'm seeing huge amounts of opportunity sitting there, despite the fact that the media are talking doom and gloom with interest rates. I've just got a cat just stand on my lap. Hello, cat. So interest rates, we've got construction costs going up, we've got inflation going up, lots of people talking about recessions, and yet hidden in there is actually an opportunity hidden in disguise. So I want to go and show you what that actually is so you actually know how to read the market yourself. On top of that, we also went out to our community some time ago, a couple of weeks ago, and asked what is the single biggest challenge that is holding them back. We got over 300 responses to that. So I'm going to tailor the day to try and answer those 300 type questions. Now, in doing that, it was amazing how there were so many very similar themes, and there was really a top 10 type question that came through. So we're going to spend a lot of time drilling into those top 10 issues that you guys have. So that said, that's what's coming up in our community in the next couple of weeks. But now I guess what you want to do is actually get to the questions. So we've got a lot of questions that have already come through. As I said, if you want to submit a question for next month, make sure that you actually click on the links below, and I'm going to give you that open mic link as well, so that you always have that for next time. Now, the first question comes from Dan. So Dan's got a question. He says, I've been researching a suburb and seen a number of large blocks that have got a gazetted road that are not yet paved. Okay. Now, does this actually represent a challenge for the unbuilt street, and what are the implications from the development side of things? Dan, that's a fantastic question. As a matter of fact, it actually happens a lot more than you would think. As a matter of fact, a project that I'm doing right now has that exact same scenario. Now, what this is telling you is the fact that council has long-term intentions to actually build the road. Now, council are going to use this as a potential opportunity to force you as the developer to construct some or all of that road. So you want to be very, very careful to actually understand I guess whether or not that implication is on you, depending upon the size of your project and how deep into the road you are. So if you've got a 100-meter road and you're trying to do it in the middle of the road, you might have to build 50 meters worth of road. But if you're at one end, perhaps you only have to build 10 meters worth of road, for example. So know that that potential is there. It could be quite a significant impact to the feasibility of your project. You should engage with your town planner to actually determine whether or not that's going to be a mandatory element of that. I would highly recommend a pre-lodgement meeting with council to get their take on it based on the size of your project and how much traffic that's actually going to generate. And if your project is large enough, it's potentially going to trigger, I guess, a traffic flow analysis. So make sure that you actually get a traffic engineer to actually determine how much traffic you're going to be generating in order to put that I guess, argument to council to counteract the fact that they want you to actually construct the road. So be very cautious of that. Make sure that you've actually factored in the feasibility that the construction of the road is a probable outcome. Now, that said, the flip side of that is, why didn't council build the road? In many instances, council had an intention to build the road, but then something changed. So you want to look for what is the something. Now, by way of example, I touched on the fact that I'm doing a project right now. What happened is council did an overland flow study in my particular instance, and they determined if they actually put the road in that location, then it would actually create more issues with overland flow than it would leaving it as natural ground. And so council decided to not do that. So it's not always a mandatory outcome. You want to actually research that a little bit deeper and actually find out what the situation of council is and the political appetite, and hence why the pre-lodgement, I guess, statement is there. Now, my cat is going schizo, folks. I've been away for about 5 days, and so she's, I guess, scratching and clawing and kneading. So don't be surprised if I get disrupted a number of times. Now, next question comes from Tim. Tim says, I'm developing my principal place of residence that I've owned for 26 years in Hobart in a very high demand area. Rob, you've previously mentioned not to develop in your own name, but what about principal place of residence? What are the liabilities, risks, etc., that you've actually mentioned previously, and what are the ways to actually mitigate them? If you have time, would you sell them on as individual strata lots, 10 to 15% discount, or would you sell them all on together on one title and get capital gains tax? So, Tim, I need to be really careful here, mate, because I'm not allowed to legally give you any accounting or legal advice. So I'm going to kind of give you some insights into what to go and actually ask the right professionals, but I can't actually tell you what to do. Super important that you understand. It's not that I don't want to answer the question. I certainly do, but I'm going to try and give you some insights into the kind of questions you do want to ask. Now, what the ATO look at, so you've got a couple of challenges here. What the ATO look at is, what was your intent, okay? So clearly, in this instance, your intent was that this was going to be your principal place of residence. You've owned that for 26 years. And so up until here, it's been a very simple, easy assessment. And so they're going to say, well, this is a long-term hold, it would actually be subject to capital gains. But because it's your principal place of residence, you get a capital gains tax exemption. So if you sold it as is, where is right now, there's no problem. Where it gets murky is now when you decide at the end of the process that you actually want to develop it. Now, there are certain scenarios that I highly recommend that you speak to your accountant about to see whether or not you qualify for. Those certain scenarios are the fact that the city has now grown into your property. So, for example, if you were rural land and the city has now grown out towards you and you've been rezoned as part of that process, it's not your fault that the value of the property is now based on the new zoning of that. And so there are instances where it might be deemed that all you're doing is realizing the capital growth of the property that has actually naturally occurred. And you may not be deemed as being a developer if you do it as a one-off enterprise. Now, I want to be super, super careful here. In order to make that determination, you will need a private ruling from the ATO, and you'll need your accountant to lodge that private ruling to determine whether or not that is actually the case. Now, if you are a serial developer and you're doing lots of developments all the time, you might not qualify for that argument. So, and also based on, was it always zoned that, you may not realize that argument as well. So, if it was always zoned the same zoning as now, then you haven't had any uplift from the fact that the city has actually grown towards you. So make sure that you actually speak to your solicitor, your accountant, I should say, get them to go and talk to the ATO, get a private ruling in place and see whether or not that actually applies for you. The private ruling is probably going to take, I'm going to say 2 or 3 weeks to prepare the correct arguments. And then it might take a month or two to actually get the response back. That private ruling is unique and specific to you and that particular project and can't be inferred to apply to anybody else. So for anyone who is listening to this and thinking, hey, I see Tim getting away with this, and therefore I think I can do that. Unfortunately, that's not the case. A private ruling is unique, and they look at the circumstances and the merits of that particular site and that particular scenario. So, Tim, I highly recommend that you put that private ruling in and see whether or not you can actually argue for that. Now, that said, you're asking me for advice on, do you sell it as individual strata lots or sell it together on one title? Mate, I think, firstly, again, I can't give advice, but you need to do the feasibility on that. And I want you to keep in mind this next phrase: highest and best use is the maximum amount of money with the least amount of hassle in the least amount of time. So when you have done the feasibility on doing the development approval, do you just sell it as a DA approved site? You might make a significant uplift on that, but if you go and construct it, you may not get as much uplift as you think compared to the amount of cash you're putting in. Now, it could be the opposite. You could get a massive amount of uplift. So you need to actually make that assessment on your deal and on your deal's merits as to whether or not that's a good outcome. All of those things are deal by deal, and unfortunately, it's not something that I can give a specific advice on unless you are actually inside our mentoring program, and I can actually help you on the merits of the deal itself, and we can actually see whether or not that's actually a good outcome. But even then, I can't give you advice. All I can say is, look, here's the pros and cons of that particular approach. Next question, Boyd. Boyd says, hi, Robin. Hello. Please, how am I supposed to get finance for a site of 11 townhouses? Boyd, that's a very big question in a very small sentence, mate. Firstly, let's start with townhouses and the fact that you're doing 11. You're going to very, very much be struggled to do this with residential lending because you're more than 3 properties, more than 3 dwellings. So almost certainly you're going to be into the commercial funding space. Now, commercial funders tend to look at this on the merits of the deal. So they're going to look at the profitability of the deal, and then subject to the profitability of the deal, they're going to be less concerned about the serviceability that you have as an individual and more about, is there security in the project with equity inside the deal? So typically, they're going to want 30% of the total development cost of that project as equity within the deal. Now, that could be value within the land, or that could be cash that you've actually injected into the project. If you can do that and the project looks feasible and they can see that you've got experience in running a deal like that, they're going to look at the deal on its own merits and likely fund that. However, if you are short on the equity, then chances are you're going to need to find some private investors or joint venture partners to actually help you to contribute to the equity to get you to the point where you are going to satisfy that commercial finance side of things. So that said, your commercial rates are a little bit higher, but the beauty of that is that what they're really doing, the reason why it's higher, and I want everybody to be super clear on this, if you go for residential lending, it's super attractive to have these low interest rates, but they're assessing it on a 20 or 30 year basis, and that they're going to have money drip fed over them over a large period of time, and that the market is going to do a whole bunch of heavy lifting for them. So they know that it's a relatively low risk. Whereas a development funder is funding on a very short period of time. They're taking a lot of risk. They're backing the project itself. And so they need to, I guess, get their rewards in a very short period of time, and having to ratchet in, I guess, the risk element of this as well. So you will see interest rates anywhere between, I'm going to say 7 and 12% typically for, I guess, a commercial lender, depending upon the merits of the deal, and plus the equity that you're actually going to need in that process. So factor those into the project. Make sure that you've actually got, I guess, that factored in from a cost perspective, because that can add up very, very quickly. Hope that helps, Boyd. Next question is from Rob. So Rob says, hey, I missed yesterday's session on ES developments. I think you mean environmental sustainability developments. Can you please explain what the new regulations require to comply with, and where do we find out more? So that's in reference to the Melbourne meetup that we had on the weekend, where Dave Mahoney from HIP v Hype presented on the new changes to the National Construction Code that are coming. And they're proposed to go live in a couple of months' time, with a transition period over a lengthy period. And the fundamental changes that are happening is environmental sustainability is going to start to become a mandatory part of all of our developments moving forward. And so whilst there's a transition period from, I guess, the old code to the new, we're going to go from 6-star energy rated buildings to 7-star energy rated buildings for all of our developments moving forward. What that means is, depending upon where you are in your development cycle, you need to very seriously consider the impacts of the changes to the National Construction Code. If you are brand spanking new with a raw site and you're developing from day one, then you should take into consideration the fact that by the time you get to the DA approval and the construction phase, then it's highly likely that these the new national construction codes are going to be in place. So you should design upfront with that environmental sustainability in mind and that 7-star energy rating. If, however, you are midway through a project, you've already got your development approvals in place, and you're just going to construct now, you might have minimal impact at all. But if you're kind of halfway through, then you want to start to be really, really cognizant of the fact that, hey, you might get caught halfway. Or if you're sitting on a DA-approved site and you've not pulled the trigger because you think market conditions don't quite work for you, and you wait too long, you might get caught out. Now, what does a 7-star energy rating mean? Well, it's going to change completely the way you actually design the home, okay? So we're talking about trying to make the home as energy efficient as humanly possible, so that it has less impact from a climate change perspective, and needs less energy to heat, less energy to cool, all those sorts of things, okay? So now this is not my area of expertise, so I'm just going to paraphrase some of the things that Dave said. I highly recommend that if you are an annual member, that you go and actually look at that recording. We have all of our back catalogue of recordings for our annual members to actually access in our members only area. So go and have a look at that. That should be up once it's edited in a couple of days' time. So I'm going to say from Wednesday onwards, highly likely. Now, what are the things from a very, very high level? I guess the more of these factors you can actually get to work for you, the easier it is to to achieve, but you don't necessarily have to do every single one of them. Okay, what you want is the 7-star overall, and so some of those things are going to come in. Now, one of them is the 7-star energy rating. Plus, there's a whole of house assessment tool, so that you basically plug in the parameters of the house into this whole of house assessment tool, and that's going to spit out a score for you. And subject to that score, you then have to start to modify, I guess, the construction elements of the building. And so, if you've got a poor design, you may have to factor in more insulation, you may have to factor in some solar, you may have to do all sorts of things, improve the glazing of your property, etc. Now, if you're designing from scratch, then there's some nice elements that you would try to incorporate in up front to make the ease of that 7-star energy rating try to comply. So, for example, if you could design with your living areas facing north, that promotes some passive heat during winter, which is always a great outcome. Okay. If you can avoid west-facing bedrooms, that's going to save for uncomfortable temperatures in the evenings as people actually go to bed. You want to locate laundries and bathrooms and that sort of thing in the west, in the southern-facing and western-facing facades, where it doesn't need as much heating. You're basically going to go in there for a couple of minutes, put the load of washing on, and step out. So you don't need to heat those rooms up all the time. So why don't you put them in the areas where they don't need to be heated? And where it doesn't really matter so much. Any west or south-facing glazing, you want to make sure that you're avoiding excessive heat in gains and all those sorts of things. And there's a whole bunch more, mate. So without me paraphrasing absolutely everything that Dave said, I highly encourage you to go and actually look at that past recording, and you will get plenty of insights out of that. But no, folks, National Construction Code is changing. And if you want to know where to go to look that up, just Google National Construction Code 2022. And if you create yourself an account, then you will be able to download the new standards and the current standards and the new proposed standards, which haven't yet gone live. So you should be able to do that. Now, warning, it's about 600 pages worth of stuff, folks. So there's quite a bit to read. But there are also some, summaries to say, look, these are the changes that are actually coming in place. That'll help you massively in going forward. Next question is from Tony. Tony says, hi, Rob. I'm in the middle of a refinancing and seems that all banks and mortgage brokers are trying to cross-collateralize all my assets into one large loan. I've read your post on no cross-collateralization and how to get them not to do this. Do you get several different loans from different banks? This would be quite a bit of effort as I have 9 assets to consider to do this. Or is this the only way? Also, do I get lines of credit for each loan? So, Tony, big question there, mate. And again, I don't know your personal circumstances, so I can't give you any legal, accounting, or financial advice. But what I can tell you is some principles that you want to try to apply. Now, best practice says to not cross-collateralize. That's best practice. And that way, if one project goes south, then the losses are contained just in that one project, and the other assets are isolated. Okay, that's best practice. Whilst they're isolated, you still have an obligation to meet the losses of this one, but you get to choose which one of these assets you get to sacrifice in order to service the problem that actually happened over here. And so what you really want is the control to say, look, this is a really high-performing asset. I want to keep that one. This one's a low-performing asset. I want to sell that one. Now, if you are cross-collateralized, then the bank basically says, well, if this one's gone south, I can see into all of these, and the one that's easiest for me to sell in order to get the proceeds to pay this off is the one I'm going to sell. And of course, that's almost invariably going to be your highest performing asset. So that's why you want to minimize that cross-collateralization as much as you can. That said, it can be quite tricky to actually do. And in the early days of your property career, it can be near on impossible to do. So you've got these goals that we're trying to get to, but you're going to have to stage yourself to actually get into that. And in order to do that, you need to have each property able to wash its own face. So you need to have manufactured enough equity in that will actually meet the holding deposit, that 20% holding deposit. And you also need to have it positively geared enough that it's actually going to be paying its own loan so that it can stand alone. If it can't stand alone, then the bank will want to cross collateralize. Now, not knowing anything about your assets, not knowing whether or not they're positively geared, negatively geared, or the like, it sounds to me like overall you're struggling from a serviceability perspective, and so what they're trying to do is that, or you're struggling from an equity perspective, so they need to cross collateralize in order to satisfy each one of those on its own merits. I can't tell you if that's actually the case or not, but if you go talk to your finance broker and talk to them about, hey, how do I actually pull this apart? Maybe you can't pull them all apart in the first go, but you might be able to get individual assets to stand on their own in the first instance. Maybe you get 2 or 3 initially, and then as the market grows, you're going to start to get some equity in the others that might allow, and I guess rental uplifts and things like that. And over time, they're going to become easier and easier to, refinance into a standalone individual instance. So go talk to your mortgage broker, mate. He's going to help you massively in determining your own personal circumstances whether that actually applies. Julian's then got a question. Hi, Rob. Really appreciate your time and valuable information that you deliver in these sessions. I have 2 questions. Let's see how we can go here. I would like to know, what is the minimum or average amount of capital I need to get started with my first subdivision? I like the subdivision strategy is more comfortable and suitable for me at the moment. I'm located in Brisbane, so it'd be great to know what amount of capital I would need to get started in Brisbane. I need to have a value in mind to start working out how can I raise it. So that's question number 1. There is a second question. I'll come to that in a sec after I've answered question number 1. So Julian, firstly, I guess you have to look at each individual site on its own merits. That's the first thing. The cost of the process from a pure subdivision perspective, you've got to think about everything. So stamp duty getting in, agents' commissions, the council contribution fees, all those sorts of things. So the costs of those are going to be unique in every single jurisdiction. So one council, for example, and you mentioned Brisbane. So Brisbane, their contribution fees are likely to be in the vicinity of $28,000 for every single new dwelling. Now you do the exact same project in Melbourne, and that might be only $4,000 or $5,000. So you can have very distinctly different costs. Okay, so I need to be careful here that I don't give an answer just that is unique to you. I need to be able to, answer so that everybody can benefit from this. Similarly, your services, so sewer, stormwater, etc., that depends on whether or not the services are located on the property, on the nature strip, in the road, or in the rear neighbour's property. So they can vary very much significantly based on that. Now, there's a concept called a standard connection. That is where it's either inside the property or inside the nature strip, and it's very, very easy for the utility provider to actually access that without actually impacting anybody else. That might be, for a lot of utility providers, that's an off-the-shelf cost. So I know, for example, that those costs in Brisbane, where you said that you are, that's Queensland Urban Utilities. They have a price book where you can actually just look it up and say, okay, how much for sewer, how much for water, etc., and you know exactly what that price point is. If, however, you're in the road or in the the neighbour's property or across the road, now you're going to start to have additional costs that actually start to come in, and chances are you need to have a custom design to actually do that. So you've got a range of prices, my friend, in order to try and deal with this. So now those range of prices is going to be different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction as well. So I'm going to say, to try and answer this generically for everyone, remembering stamp duty in, agents, commissions, finance, all those sorts of things, for a 1:2 subdivision, it could be anywhere from as low as $60,000 to as high as $150,000, depending upon the variables of the site and depending upon the jurisdiction that you're actually trying to do that in. So I would kind of make sure that you've got that $150,000 as your baseline. And then that means that any of your projects that you're actually going into, you've got a very high probability that you're going to be able to fund that, and then on the merits of the site in itself. Hoping that that helps there, Julian. Next question Julian's got is, when is the next face-to-face event in Brisbane, and when is the next course date for this year? So the best thing that you can do for our events, Julian, is actually go to our events page. So we publish these all the time. We're constantly running events all the way around the country, but there's a pattern to how we run this. So for Melbourne, we are the first Saturday of every month. For Brisbane, we are the third Saturday of every month. For Sydney, we are the fourth Saturday of every month. So that pattern repeats over and over and over with some very, very minor exceptions. So make sure that you, go to our events page and actually have a look at that. So I know, for example, that Brisbane, we have an exception coming up in a couple of weeks' time because we're running our Property Development Formula Boot Camp. Now, you asked for the insights onto where our next course is. The best thing that you can actually do is go to our Property Development Formula page and actually have a look at that. Now, I want to be very clear. This is an application-only process. We don't allow everyone to do the program. We want to make sure that it's a good fit for you and it's a good fit for us. Because we don't want people to just come in and then not get the success. What we want at the end is raving fans. So we go through quite a rigorous process to make sure that you're going to get what you want out of it and that we are going to be able to help you in that process. So make sure you actually go and check that moving forward. Now, that said, we are just approaching a new intake for that coming up. We have a boot camp coming up in Sydney on the 16th, 17th, and 18th of September. Off the top of my head, I'm pretty bad with dates, so but you'll know just by going to that page and Saturday checking that. So depending upon when you're looking at this video recording, we post all of our dates on there. So hoping that helps. I'll put it back to the events page because I think that's something that everyone will actually benefit from. Okay, next one is from Lynn. Lynn says, I have a bus stop out the front of a property. It needs moving as it will be in the way of a driveway when I subdivide. How long does the process take and what tips do you have? Lynn, this is a bit of a tricky one because I guess in order to move the bus stop, you're going to be impacting another person down the road. And so you need to get that person's approval that they are willing to take the bus stop out the front of their property and then go to council and say, look, I've already negotiated down the road, says that they're okay with it. I'm happy to pay for the relocation costs and then start to put that together. Now, if you're lucky enough that the size of your frontage means that you can actually relocate that bus stop still within the frontage of your own property, then it's not going to be such a big problem. But if you're impacting a neighbour, I'm going to guess that most neighbours are not going to want to be supportive of that. And so you could be a little bit tricky in actually trying to get that across the line. So make sure that you go and do that. Now, the costs, that's going to vary from council to council, but functionally it depends. Is your bus stop just a post? Or is it an entire bus shelter? Okay, so now council is going to take quite a while to deliberate on that, probably a good 2 to 3 months. Make sure you do a pre-lodgement meeting with council and say, hey, are you open to the idea of this? Make sure they're actually going to be supportive. They will then give you a quote on how do you actually relocate that bus stop. Now, remembering in order to do that, some of the things that you need to consider, it's not just how long is the bus in order for it to park, but the bus actually needs quite a bit of room to maneuver in and to maneuver out. So it's not just the distance of the bus, but it's actually all this lead in and lead out. You may need to get a traffic engineer to determine whether or not there is actually a suitable location to actually place that. Now, if you're going to put it in front of a neighbour's property, chances are, if that neighbour says yes, they're going to probably ask for a little bit of money to grease their palms to actually make that happen. So please go and actually make sure you speak to that neighbour, make sure that they're actually going to be open to the idea of that as you go. So, okay, that said, that is the last of our questions, folks. So if you would like to submit a question for next month, make sure that you click on the link below. So propdev.info/open-mic. Lodge your questions. We do this on the first Monday of every single month. So I'm super glad that you guys got plenty out of that. I can't wait to see you all at our 10th birthday. So I'm just going to put those dates up again. So our 10th birthday in Brisbane on the 20th of August, in Sydney 27th of August in Melbourne on the 3rd of September. Make sure you turn up early. We're going to be starting the show half an hour earlier than usual. We're going to have an industry panel of experts, as I touched on, and we're going to rock the house, folks. So make sure you get yourself a leave pass and we kick on into the night. That said, I'm super keen. I can see a whole bunch of, comments that have come through from a little bit earlier, but it's clear that was when I had the technical challenges. So everything seems to be solved now. Thanks, folks. It's been a pleasure, and we'll talk to you on the flip side. Okay, bye for now.